Okay, folks, can we hear each other?
Check.
Yep.
You see the agenda?
Yes.
No.
Oh, I see your calendar.
A calendar is what you see?
Yep.
Oh.
Dan. There you go.
Okay, Frank, whenever you're ready.
All right. Call the meeting to order. Please stand for Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the
Flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, Jill.
Frank Carini,
Here.
Cheryl Sterniglia,
Cheryl, they're calling for you.
Here, I can't hear him.
Check your little thing. Sure.
I can't
No, we
hear
don't
you.
hear her.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you.
Sorry, guys.
okay, so Cheryl Sterniglia,
Here.
Amy Malat,
Here.
Leah Schreiber Johnson,
They're working on her mic.
Mark Verhalen, Darren Grabowski,
Present.
Jane Eichhoff,
Here.
Sophia Azim, here,
No.
Owen Pajemski,
Here.
Just say hello. No,
Mark, your mic is not on.
we don't hear you, Mark. It's
Leah,
this thing, Mark.
Leah, are you on? Can you say here?
Here.
Yeah, now is it on?
Yep.
Yes.
I just said it.
Perfect.
We're on?
All right, and we've got everybody. Success.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the meeting today on May 18th. Action item number 4 on the agenda, school handbook revisions.
Okay, so we went through this with Mrs. Bennon last time we were here. She's on if you have any questions for her. Otherwise, we have some updates for your approval this evening.
Can I have a motion, please?
Sterniglia moves to adopt the student family handbook updates for 2021.
Grabowski seconds.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries for approval. Number 5, middle school Amplify Science adoption.
So we've had a number of discussions on this particular resource. We have a bunch of folks on that have been part of various presentations to the board. Mr. Krennick is available, as is Mrs. Bennon. So we have this is an action item tonight for a vote.
Before we start, can we just, I hope you're not going to start over and do the whole presentation again. Can you just give us the updates that you are going to bring forward from last meeting till today?
Sure.
Thank you.
Andy, can you bring up the
I actually jumped out, John, if you want to present this.
report?
John, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
And now we
Now
can.
we
Now
can.
Yeah.
Okay.
John, I jumped out, so if you want to jump in and present, and then you can go to where you need
Oh.
to go.
Okay. Let me pull it up. So we have been meeting, we've had 3 meetings thus far. There are about 10 middle school teachers with some of the administrators, and we had 1 high school teacher that sat on as well and participated because she just wanted to see, what Amplify all entailed. And as the board had requested that we work collaboratively to look at existing science resources and existing educators use currently. And we have found some of the labs would be able to integrate with Amplify Science. And if you look at the attachment, I'm pulling it up right now. I'll view my screen in just a second here. Here we go. You should be able to see my screen now. Can you see it?
It's loaded.
It's loading
Okay.
up.
There you go.
So you can see at the top, those are the dates that we met, team members, our team norms. We have listed, and I'm not going to go through all the links with you unless you'd like me to, but we have different flex extensions that Amplify has for investigative, looking at different simulations, labs, things like that, that students can interactively engage with, in addition to the link below it, and I'll bring this up. We broke it up by grade level so that each grade level could find current labs that would integrate with Amplify's resource. And then the learning requirements that the lab would meet. Evidence of learning is the oral reports, completion of lab, reflections, why we would want to integrate the lab, and then about how many days does a lab and reflection evidence of learning take. So we're still working through the process. It is a tedious process looking at what we're currently doing and aligning it to what Amplify also provides. So students will be getting that hands-on approach in addition to what Amplify also offers. What we also did is looked at additional resources that would be needed for not only Amplify, but if they're going to integrate a current lab, there are resources that some of the buildings and grade levels do not have. So we're going through that right now and aligning what resources are needed. We'll get those ordered by the end of this school year so that they're ready for September. Those are known as our one-time purchases, and I'll pull that up as well, just so that you can kind of see what this will look like. We want to make sure that there's equity across all of the 3 buildings in Power West and East to ensure that the proper resources are available to our staff and students. So we're organizing that. We're working together on aligning what resources are needed. And I think the last piece I would just like to draw your attention to is we do a plus delta at the end of each meeting. And I'm not going to go through them all, but if you look at the first plus delta, there are some pluses and some deltas, and I'll pull them up right now. So this is the first meeting that we had. And when people come together with the idea of putting students first and ensuring that not only our teachers' needs met, but most importantly, students' needs are met, we work through the process. And by our third meeting, we're down to 1 delta and 1 additional plus. So aligning the proficiency scale is a plus. We're seeing how the labs integrated with Amplify and what changes might need to be made as we come up through the resource adoption. So we will continue to meet. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, May 20th. We're going to continue looking at what resources are needed and continue aligning current and existing labs to Amplify. We're going to keep working through till we have all the labs identified and resources that are needed. And, if it were to pass, we will bring in Amplify's team for additional professional development, hopefully live sometime in August. We're going to wait till August. So it's preferred to do a live training than virtual, but we may have to go with virtual based on COVID-19. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to everybody. So that was the the task that we were given back in April to bring, educators together. You saw teachers that have implemented and piloted Amplify as a resource, did a really nice job laying out, the benefits of it and how they used it throughout the pilot. And again, a pilot is just that. It's getting your feet wet with the resource and, identifying what are some strengths of the program, maybe or what are some areas for opportunity for improvement. There's not a perfect resource out there, but what I can tell you is this resource that we're potentially going to adopt as a high quality resource compared to what we're currently using. And it is aligned to the Wisconsin science standards.
So at this point, Mr. Creaney, I think we'd probably call for a motion and then discuss it as a board if we have additional questions for John.
Yep, I was just going to say that.
Yep.
Looking for a motion.
Mr. Niglia will move to approve for the basis of discussion.
Grabowski seconds.
Any discussion?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mark.
John, how many labs are going to be integrated into the Amplify program?
Depending on the grade level, there's 4, 5, maybe 6 labs.
Per year?
entire year?
Per semester?
Yeah, I would say there's probably 2-ish a quarter that we're able to align.
And how many labs are integrated into the coursework now?
It depends on the different grade levels. I couldn't tell you exactly how many each teacher. It's different, between grade levels. Some teachers integrate different labs in the same grade level.
Would you say, John, it varies dramatically from teacher to teacher?
Oh, yeah, I'd say there's a pretty decent wide variance. And that's one of the positives of having a resource that's aligned, is that there's similar experiences for our students, but also the freedom to align a resource or a lab that they currently feel is really important. They still are able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, my concern was that I don't want to have the kids doing virtual stuff or book work day after day, week after week after week, and not have any opportunities to do labs like they do now.
One of the things that we talked about, Mark, and that's a great point, is that science is hands-on, and that's why we're working together to go through with different labs and different opportunities that students are able to, teachers are able to use with the different the labs and lessons.
Piggyback, I guess, off of Mark's question. Part of bringing the groups together was my understanding to kind of figure out, could we meld Amplify and the current, and are we at a point where we know these are the number of labs we want to add, and can they be worked into the curriculum? I know one of the pieces of feedback we had got is that you have to move at a pretty decent clip to get through all of the components of Amplify. And is there the opportunity to slow that down and add labs and still get through all of the curriculum?
The answer is yes. We scaled back some of the learning requirements. When we originally started the work for learning requirements, we were at 20-ish. Now we're down between 8 and 10. And we want to make sure that the learning requirements that we're going to integrate are integrated with quality and proficiency versus going wider, we're going deeper.
How many, John?
I think another thing to keep in mind too is a lab doesn't equate to days. So if John says like 6 labs, that doesn't mean 6 days.
Right.
There's multiple labs that take multiple days. And if you're not doing a lab, it doesn't automate to just being online, working independently. Like if you remember back to the presentation that all the teachers did a month ago, there's a variety of things that they're doing, and they had examples on your tables too of different learning. So even when it's not in a lab, there's a lot of inquiry, there's a lot of discussion. So it's not just like we're not in a lab, we're on a computer. And a lab doesn't just mean that's 6 days. Lots of labs are multiple days with the build up, the work, and then the actual lab, the inquiry, the discussion, and the feedback cycles.
John, you said 10 teachers and some administrators are sitting on that board when you have the discussion about this?
Yeah, we have, not everybody can make
real-
it, but go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. So how many teachers total between the middle schools and high school are there in the science department then? If you had 10 on there?
Well, we're looking just at middle school.
Okay.
So it was mainly the middle school educators, and then we had one science teacher that was interested as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is just 6th through 8th grade.
And this, if we go for it, it's for 8 years when we pay
Yes.
for the subscription. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The licenses are 8 years. And the reason why we went with 8 years is because that's right around when the new science, every 10 years, the science requirements are reviewed and updated at the state level. And this is 8 years also was a really good base for the resource. We could go 7, but then it costs a little bit more. When we go out an extra year, the price goes down.
Okay, thanks.
I'm
So
probably asking, oh, sorry.
that's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm probably asking this question too far along in the process. Maybe I should have asked this earlier. But I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about how the decision to pilot Amplify maybe even came about. Who was part of determining that it was Amplify we would pilot, or were there how many other programs did we look at or pare down to get to the fact that we piloted Amplify this last year?
Gail, you want to take that question?
Yeah, I was gonna say I could take that one because it started a while back. So like our curriculum process, and we'll do a workshop in the future with the board, so there's a better understanding to the process. What it started with and what John referenced before is breaking down the standards and looking at what are our district learning requirements. That's our actual curriculum. And where it was at 20, they cut back to about 10 because there's no way to do all standards in any content area with fidelity if you did every one through school year. So you pick the ones that you're really going to do with fidelity. That was design teams that were the teachers, a lot of the teachers John's talked about, not every science teacher because we subbed out during the school day sometimes, but it included high school, it included 5th grade. So there was like a scope and sequence to the work of what we needed for a scientist when they graduate. Then from there, so we finished that work about a year ago. And then from there went into what is a resource. So Amplify is a resource that aligns with it. John's referenced like the next gen science standards, which Wisconsin now aligns to. And there's not a lot of resources that align and are highly rated. So it kind of goes back to that first meeting almost 2 months ago of what is highly rated. It was looking at those pieces for quite some time and reviewing what was there. And then Amplify was the one that was coming out the highest. Going through a pilot, the goal is to talk about what works well, what doesn't work well. Nothing's a perfect alignment. There's always going to be some supplementing to meet our learning requirements. But through the team that piloted, which it was all but just a couple of our middle school science teachers, they were on board at that time and talking about like, this is a good resource. Yeah, we're going to need to do some supplementing, but it's meeting our learning requirements well. And then John has taken that to an even deeper level with this additional task force and making sure that we're honoring the work that the teachers have done and allowing some flexibility in how they supplement labs, but also making sure those labs align to the learning requirements. Because when you talk about like limited time, if we're doing a favorite lab, but it doesn't really align anymore, is that really best for our learners? So that's some of the adjustment going on too. And then the other reality to it is that the resource we have adopted is not being used in every classroom. I don't even know that it's used regularly in any classroom. We have a lot of differences across the district, and there's a necessity to getting that cleaned up too. It's not equitable right now, and that's what we need to work towards. So it's been multiple years of work. Amplify was the one looked at. Nothing else was brought forward that I'm aware of as ideas. And we do continue to look at what's there. We do an 8-year adoption because it meets our adoption cycle and how we can budget money to get new resources. But also there's more and more open ed coming up every day. So Amplify will build on what they have, and other resources will too. So maybe we'll find something else 4 years down the line that's open ed, meaning it has limited cost to it, if any, sometimes. It might be able to supplement further, but right now it's the best resource that's out there. And John could add if any other resources were even coming up, even in your task force you did for the last month or so.
No additional inquiries on other resources.
We talked to any other districts that are using this, and are those districts in block scheduling?
We're in extended periods, but I don't think we've talked to, I'm not sure if we've talked to any other districts using it.
And I don't know whether or not this is fact or fiction. I heard today that Cedarburg recently adopted this and just made the decision to stop using it. Again, I have no clue. I haven't verified that at all, but it's a local district.
I'm not aware of that.
It does surprise me to hear that we haven't talked to any districts in the area that are using it.
What is it typical curriculum team to ask all the neighbors what their curriculum is when they go into this? And could you also explain to the board what process we would engage in if we chose not to adopt this? Like, what would we come back to with the middle school science department? Like, what would this look like?
Sure. Well, as a learning team, anytime we look at a resource, we do look at what other districts are using something. The science standards are newer, so there's not a lot of aligned resources. And so the ones that are there, Amplify in particular is a newer resource. So part of the reason we don't have other districts we've talked to, I can't speak to Cedarburg, but I wish we'd have known that ahead of time, because I'm always hesitant when we air things that we don't know are public, because whether we adopt this or not, like everything we continue to talk about, like will impede on the learning we want to take place. So we always look at what other resources are out there. We always look at what other districts are using it. Amplify is newer and the standards are newer. So there's been some difficulty to find other places that are using it. And it's not because it doesn't work, it's just because it's newer. And there hasn't been other ones that we've looked for, because we have looked, because it's very serious for us to bring in what we believe to be the best and to get the feedback from the teachers. If we don't vote for this tonight, or in the future, I guess, what'll happen is we'll go back to the last board adopted book, because that's what we should have been doing, right? And we haven't overly pushed it because it's so outdated, it doesn't align. But if we don't vote for this or decide what to do from here, then what we will do next year, what John will do next year, is go back to that 1997, I believe it is, resource. We'll have to make sure we have enough of them for all students. We'll have to purchase, which they'll be at probably a much higher price tag than Amplify, to be honest, because they're outdated. We're not going to find them. But that would be the last board adopted. So, or we say go back to the drawing board, but the drawing board will be another year. So it will easily still be going back to that 97 resource for the year while we try to identify something else to pilot, get it in the hands of our teachers, get the PD that's needed to do it with fidelity, and then implement it. So that part alone will take usually probably 6 months from now, because we're talking summer in there too, and trying to get people together and whatever that looks like. So it would be another year out before we're possibly in front of you with another adoption. And it would be using the 97 resource in the meantime, because we're saying here that Amplify doesn't meet our needs. So we wouldn't put that back in a classroom. So we'd go back to the last adopted resource.
So Amplify is a newer program, right? So is there any chance we could do an additional year of the pilot rather than adopting it right away?
We can. I mean,
same question.
Find anything different, but I mean, yeah, you can do anything from here.
So we could do an additional year of piloting, possibly present it to more teachers.
Well, there's only maybe 3 teachers left that have not used it, so there's not a lot to present it to. But what I would suggest doing is then you put that old resource in the other rooms, and then we bring you the data of the 2 actually compared, because we didn't force that because it doesn't align, and it's not best for learning. But that's the difference you'd have.
Right. Well, I know there's been some good discussions that have happened in this task force, which I appreciate, and I'm glad that they're happening. I just want to make sure that, you know, if we do this, that we do have more time to look at the revisions that the teachers are asking for, and making sure that it's done thoughtfully. And
So John, could I, just to build on what Amy's saying here. So if if the middle school science team was moving along with this resource and decided that supplemental materials were necessary, that adjustments were needed, that there still wasn't enough hands-on or lab availability, how would that team go about integrating those like mid-year changes into this work? Or would it be a static curriculum for the next 8-year life of the contract?
No, one of the things that we've discussed and what was presented in the presentation from 2 meetings ago was, we're going to continue to work with our educators, support our educators, not just now, but next school year, the following school year, meeting quarterly to ensure that what need to be met, we are able to, work with our educators and support them. If there are changes or things that are working really well, we'll continue to work, implement the things that are going well. And if there's opportunities for things to be different, then we'll look at that as well. But it's a team effort. It's gonna, it's evolving. All teaching and learning, we work together.
Sure. And I've got my notes in front of me, John, from the various presentations I've been able to witness and participate here, right? And one of my big notes was the integration of labs, right? And the other one was reservations about engagement, right? So I know you and your group worked on lab integration, right?
Yep.
One of the other concerns and questions that people had were high interest engaging activities for students. And I know you had said that it was the first year, right? We have a lot of people who are rule followers who are attempting to implement the curriculum with a lot of fidelity and trying hard not to deviate because they're in a pilot, right? But that concern of student engagement, was your committee able to address that and talk at all about high engagement activities that could come from this or any other resource that our science team could be using?
Absolutely. And that's where the existing labs would come in and be used and aligned to the Amplify resource. And again, Annalee said it correctly. Our learning requirements is the curriculum, the resource that we use. We want to find the best resource that is aligned to the learning requirements. That could be Amplify. It could also be existing labs. I think we're getting the best of both when you have teachers working together and identifying certain labs that they feel are really important and aligned to the standards, aligned to Amplify.
So the team, let's just say we're a quarter in and we're not feeling that engagement. We're not feeling that lab work that we enjoyed in the past, right? If the team wanted to revisit that subject, they'd be able to, and the structure would be in place for them to be able to do so without having to call together a task force or an ad hoc committee or something like that. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct.
That's correct.
We'll be meeting and collaborating throughout this entire process. It's not just meet 4 times. Okay, we'll see in 8 years. We're going to meet and we're going to continue to meet, this week, the following week, over the summer, into the fall, into the winter, into the spring. It's a cycle that we run.
Did you have popular labs that people had enjoyed historically that you were unable to find a home for during this process?
That's one of the things that we had to discuss is, number one, how are the labs aligned? Just because you've always done them doesn't mean they're aligned the best. And if they're not aligned and we're doing them, that's taking the place of something else. And
right.
Time can be our asset or time can be our enemy. And if we're going to try to do labs that are fun but not aligned, that's taking away from time that could be spent on the aligned learning requirements and standards.
I guess to Amy's point.
During the presentation, the teachers are saying that some students didn't find it fun because they weren't hands-on, or some students were left behind. Is that because of their computer skills that they weren't understanding the concept of this, or do they have to have extra teaching on how to use if we integrate this, how to use the computer and how to do the labs and stuff like that are online?
No, that's what one of the nice pieces to Amplify is that you can differentiate throughout the different labs. So as you
John, you have a bad connection.
Based on no.
There you go.
Can you hear
You're
me?
working now.
Okay, I don't know why this is going in and out. During the presentation, Jessica Fell, who teaches at Empower, talked about how she was able to have different groups of students based on different abilities and things like that, so that students are working at their Lexile reading level, engagement, and so forth. And that was really important so that it's not too far over one's head or too low. We want to make sure that we're challenging students at all levels. And that's one of the great assets that Amplify allows for, is that you're able to differentiate and meet all students' needs, EL, special ed, extended learning for students that are at the 98th, 99th percentile. We want to challenge and push them as well. We don't want them to be in a situation where they already may know the content or have the standards, they're proficient. We want to stretch and challenge them as much as we can. And that's one of the nice pieces to Amplify, is that they provide those extensions above and beyond.
Can that be done at all levels? Someone had mentioned to me that they thought there were areas that could be differentiated, but not everything. It wasn't you could be a green all year or a blue all year or a purple, that there were certain aspects of Amplify that could be differentiated, but other larger chunks that couldn't be differentiated.
That's what I heard too.
I can speak to that a little bit, if you want, John.
Go ahead, Claire.
So when it comes to the differentiation, with the green, blue, and purple group, that happens every single unit, and that's a midpoint check. So what's based on their kind of like midpoint unit check, they will get a level, and then that's how they would progress for like the next component of that unit, to make sure by the end of each unit, every kid has gotten the support they need, whether it's review, whether it's at grade level content, and then there's also that extension component. Then when it comes to other differentiation, there is some great learning help with reading to them and things like that, especially if you've got the ELL students or maybe the special education students that need that assistance. But then some things we've been talking about and how we might revise is really looking at those assessments, and that's where we're taking this for that first component. And then if we adopt, we're able to, change things and modify them for that. So I would be looking at my assessments and saying, how could I differentiate those a little bit more to meet the lower level learners? Some ways I've done it is just printing them off, crossing out 2 answers and leaving them a little bit differently. But I think that's something that we can work on in the future. And so we're going to keep modifying that in the future.
My concern is that, one of the things I've heard is that people have concerns about special ed, that they've tried it and it wasn't successful with kids that had special learning needs. So that has me concerned. It has me concerned that there still seems to be a significant number of staff who have deep, deep concerns about this program. I'm concerned because there's parents who have concerns about this program. My biggest concern is that we're coming out of a huge crisis in our country, and we don't know how kids are going to feel. We don't even know if we're coming back in the fall. We sure hope so, but we don't know in what capacity yet. I'm just worried that we're bringing in a huge project and tackling something that maybe we're just not going to be ready for emotionally, physically, whatever. So I just have some real concerns, and I just feel that there's too many staff who still aren't on board, and these are staff I think who want kids to be successful, and it's not just because they're afraid of change or anything like that. It's just they just don't feel that this is meeting the needs. And I don't know. I just wish we had some other options, or I don't know.
Cheryl, some staff are set in their ways, I believe, truly, that they're used to teaching the way they taught for the last 10, 15, 20 years. They don't like new. This is like the information highway, but this is like the Autobahn, fast pace, because it's all online, and it's a totally different learning experience for everybody, and I think that's the way our society is going, the way we're going to be moving. We may not do it this time around, but we're going to be left behind. That's just my personal opinion.
I just don't feel that way.
If I could interject, I'd ask John to share, of the total science department, the middle level science department, who would be using this, right? What percentage of that department would you say had been incorporated into some phase of this process, either the pilot, the early iterations, or your latest task force? Like, how much input did you get on what you're bringing to the board today?
Well, they've all been part of our meetings since, when we brought this to the board. So I would.
You understand why, right? Like Cheryl's
Yeah.
asking a question about a subject that we've discussed for months, right? So there's been a wide timeline of input, messages, emails, right? Like, and here you are, and you just presented 4 different plus delta sheets from 4 meetings that you had in between board meetings, right? So like a lot's happened recently. Like, that's why I asked that question.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's a great question. Everybody was invited to be on the task force. Some have been to all the meetings. Some were not at all the meetings because they had different commitments. But everybody has had a voice in the process, and they'll continue to have a voice in the process, and we'll continue to work and collaborate and to ensure that their ideas. One of our number one norms is they're experts and they know, and we have to trust, their feedback throughout the process to ensure that we have the best science program that we can offer for our students and our learners in Oak Creek.
Basically, so that your department would have to continue that like year-long process where we go back to the well, because everyone agreed at our last meeting it's not acceptable to continue to use a 20-year-old curricular resource, right? That expired textbook that we had on everyone's desk. So you'd have to bring all these teachers together again. You'd study it for a year, right? You'd see if Amplify really is the best game in town. Even its newness, like it'll benefit from some of the things that are happening elsewhere, maybe not, but that's what we'd be in for. We'd spend a year working with this again. And I believe it was Jessica we heard from, who this is her primary curriculum that she uses, right? She noted, I have in my notes last time, she said, if we don't use this, she doesn't know what she would choose. This is what she uses consistently. And I see most of the other people that you had on the call last time, but I know I'm rambling, but my point is a lot of people were involved in this, and a lot of people will continue to be involved either in supporting this or selecting whatever else there is. And there's no guarantee whatever else there is in any way for better.
Correct.
Fair to say?
Fair to say.
Sorry, Frank. I'm rambling. Go ahead.
No, no question. I don't know if it goes to Dan, John, or Claire, or Annalee. Since this is new, kind of what Amy was saying, the pilot, can we take some, for the first year, can we take some bit and pieces of this and see how the reaction is and how the kids reflect? And you combination of what we have this year, so the older book, and a little bit of bits and pieces that we can kind of introduce as like baby steps, and seeing how that goes, and then we can do more research, and kind of like what Jane's saying, some school district maybe wasn't for sure yet, but did they have it and drop it or not, and see how that reflection is.
Well, I guess to Amy's point too, I was thinking, and kind of to what Dan says as well, if we adopt this and first semester in, we're hitting some road bumps and we need to keep evaluating, I would always assume we would continue to do that. But knowing that we're trying to take Amplify and work some labs into it, can we get this all done? I would rather not commit to something for 8 years and next year it's not working great. Let's see if we can keep working, and let's take another year as a pilot with implementing those and see how it goes. And if it goes well and they continue to work together, then we know it's worked. Yep. And if it doesn't, then we know we have to go back to the drawing board.
So Jane, what I would ask you is define what work means. What does that look like?
I'll jump in on that. If you don't mind.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
I don't know about defining what work means, but I can definitely say that something about this process didn't work, because I can tell you that there is a surprising amount of discontent from many sides of this equation. And while I hear you, John, and what you're saying sounds great, I do feel like there's a disconnect between what's coming out of your mouth and how people feel. And so something happened wrong in this process. And I think that the only way we're going to make it right is to, I'm on board with what Amy said, which is to go ahead, move forward with this for another year, continue to have it in a very tentative state so that the teachers and parents and families who have concerns feel as though there's an actual opportunity for, if this doesn't work, to back out. Like if we just go forward and say, yeah, of course we're going to keep working on it, but we commit to it for 8 years, then there's going to be a continued feeling of, well, my concerns weren't really heard. Even if they are heard, they're going to feel weren't. And so I would be interested in the idea of really thinking of pilot year 2, as an opportunity to come together and push out those kinks so that we can all commit as a unit that is committed together as a community, instead of it being, some people say it's a community and some people really don't feel like it's a community. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. And then also continuing that science task force. Sorry.
John, is it a pricing option to purchase this resource for 1 year that you're aware of?
No.
No.
So the pilot program.
What have we been doing in the last year? We've been piloting it.
Yeah.
So can't we continue to pilot it again?
There's already some expense in the program to pilot it. So unless if you're gonna add more people to pilot, I guess it would be, is the board asking us to pilot with everybody, which is only adding, I believe, 3 more teachers. So there's 10 middle level teachers that teach science. There are 6 on this meeting, which I would invite to talk because they've all been at the meetings and they can tell you about their experience. But there's only 2 or 3 out of all of the middle school teachers that didn't pilot this year. So I guess my thought would be, what would look different piloting another year with the same people looking at it if we continue to have these task forces and we are talking? I guess I'm wondering where the trust is at, because it just seems like if John's continuing to run these, and I was running them prior, and it seemed like going the right direction. Yeah, there's a couple things to figure out. But then you're saying you're hearing all this other stuff that's not coming to us through all these meetings and all this effort. I don't know how it's going to get extremely better doing the same thing. I guess that would be my only concern. Like, we can do anything, but how are we going to make that look different? Because what I'm hearing the concern to be is that we're doing these meetings, we have everybody or nearly everybody in them, but yet board members are hearing different feedback than the learning team, and the learning team is with teachers and the board. Like, we're just trying to get the best resource in kids' hands and get our scores moving and get our engagement moving. And so I don't know how it's going to look different if the messaging to us is different than the messaging to you, but yet we're all on Team Oak Creek for our families. That's the part that concerns me. Like, if I had to take this task force like John has to, I don't know what I would do next. And I'm a pretty creative person, because you can't do anything if you don't know the issues. And the issues seem to be coming to board members and not to the learning team. And that's concerning, because there's been a lot of effort in it. There are a lot of people behind it. So I don't know who's not happy with it. I highly encourage them to talk to me, talk to John, talk to Danny, any of the whoever they're comfortable with in science, get out their concerns so we can solve it. Otherwise, we are going to be right here. You're going to be right here next year having the same discussion because we're not being honest at the table. That's what's really concerning in all the work I've done in curriculum. We've done a lot, and you're getting different messaging than us. And so I'm looking for your advice on how we make that happen.
And I hear you, Annalee. I mean, I've tried to say to a number of teachers and a number of parents, hearing directly from you, whether it's, is what individuals need. I think a lot of it is fear of being labeled as someone who doesn't want to change or isn't going to be a team player, and not so much even that they're going to be fired, but that life will be made difficult for them. I guess that's all I can say. And that bothers me. But I agree. I've tried as much as possible to say, I can only come so many times and say, I've heard from a lot of people without using names and things like that. But it is still there. The only thing that I could see being different if we piloted it another year would be trying to really incorporate the labs in it, which maybe we didn't do as much this past year. And then at least you had a year of saying, did these meld well together? But I hear your concerns, and I have the same ones that, when we hear the presentations, it sounds good. And if I heard nothing else, I would think yes. And then after the meetings, I get phone calls and emails, mainly from people who, yes, don't want their name used, but still have a lot of concerns. It's a valid concern you're bringing up.
Annalee, you said 10 of the 13 teachers were involved in the pilot program or had some access to it. So those 10 are all on board with going with the curriculum now, and the other 3 have not been integrated into it. So how hard would that be to integrate those 3 into it once it's not a pilot program? Does that make sense?
That's not the issue, though, Darren.
I know the issue is because
I
I didn't hear nothing about the negative from kids or parents or anything like that. Only one other teacher, I believe it was, that emailed against it. So I didn't hear nothing negative about it. Me personally, I think it's the right way to go.
So there's 10 teachers total. I just want to clarify the numbers. And I think it's about 7 that piloted this year, but I would defer to John or Danny to give the exact number. And Claire's moved to a coaching role, and she was one of the pilots, so that changes the numbers. But there's 10 teachers total and well over 50% that piloted. Just to clarify, I didn't want to have any wrong numbers out there.
There were a number of teachers that contacted me that said that they were surprised when they saw this on the agenda for tonight for a vote. And that frustrated some of them that they didn't know about this. And these are people who were on this task force. So is there a reason why?
Cheryl, that did not being honest, because at our last meeting on Thursday, I made it very clear that this was coming to the board tonight. Yep. And that if it were not to go through, we would be going back to the 1997 green textbook that is not aligned to the state standard. Right. So they're coming to you saying one thing when you're informed of another, and that's disheartening. Like, that's just not, people are not being truthful or honest. And that I'll be honest with you, that's hurtful, because every member on our task force has had the same message. We come back together, the last 15 minute cap.
John, your mic is going out.
Lost you again.
I would add to what John's saying is he also sent the link for tonight's meeting to everybody. So if they weren't in last Thursday's meeting, there was also an email to everybody that went out this morning.
That's why you see so many pictures and faces, because they were invited to the meeting.
John needs a new microphone.
He needs to get out of the basement.
Oh.
One I'd ask too, we've discussed this in these formats, which are broadcast. This is the 3rd time, correct?
Right.
Yep. And I mean, I have my notes from our last meeting that said these are the things that need to be addressed and settled before we come back for another discussion on this. I mean, I think anybody who says that they think this is a dead issue like that, I don't want to miscarry people in conversations I wasn't privy to, but like everybody agrees that we can't do this 20-year-old curriculum forever. So
when people are not.
John's talking.
John, your connection is really slow. If you can hear us, you are losing connection.
We can't even.
Do we need to take a vote on the motion that was brought?
We do need to.
Question.
It was just a discussion motion.
No, I'm saying.
No, it wasn't.
Okay. What?
Yeah, you voted.
It was a motion to approve.
You moved to go.
There was motion for discussion.
For discussion. But
Right.
Yeah. Because I made the motion to discuss. I opened it up to discuss, and then Darren seconded. Right.
Right. So it's on the or of both.
Right. So we can call, if somebody wants to call a question, they can.
Can I interject? I've got one follow-up comment. The only reason I asked the question on the availability of labs, because I wanted some clarification, because we did discuss our concerns with not having enough labs for the kids. That was my only concern moving forward. I'm on board with certainly getting a curriculum here versus something that's 20 years old, like Derek alluded to. My only question was about the labs again. If John and the group of teachers are confident that they can integrate these labs into the curriculum, I'm confident with moving forward on this.
One thing I was hoping for a little clarification on, maybe the question can be answered at this time. So the question, I thought was a good one, was asked, what is the amount of labs that kids have been accustomed to per unit, let's say, or per quarter? And it sounded like the answer was, well, it just varies too much for us to answer, which is a real equity issue, right? Which I get behind, and I think that that's important for us to address that. But it doesn't, it worries me partly because the number John dropped at the beginning there, I think he said 4. And then when it was 2 a quarter, 4 a semester, 2 a quarter. I know from conversations I've had that that's a very low number compared to what some teachers are doing. And so I guess the question not being able to be answered, it's just too variable to say, where does 2 a quarter sit in the scale? Is it really low where a lot of people are going to be cutting a lot of labs? Or is it high enough that a lot of people are going to feel like, wow, that is just the right amount? Because one of the most common things I've heard about that is negative about this curriculum is that, yes, there's not enough labs, but more importantly, there's not enough time. It doesn't feel like there's time being created in the schedule to add the amount of labs that feels right to the teachers. And one of the requests that was made in the conversations that I had was to get more information about how curriculum is going to be cut out to make room for the labs, because the Amplify felt more like a step-by-step prescription than the kind of flexible resource that it's being billed as. Now, I totally get that is easily how somebody would feel when they first come to it, because like we've all discussed already, you want to like go through it and you don't have the familiarity with it to know like where you can kind of scoot and where you can kind of make your own adjustments. But it sounds like there's just a lot of uncertainty about how that manipulation of the curriculum will work. And there's hopes that there's going to be more concrete support given around that. I have no doubt there would be, but I just wanted to share that is a repeated thing that I'm hearing. And so if there's going to be more learning teamwork done around this, that I hope that that's a real focus, is really trying to help the teachers in science find the sweet spot and feel supported in understanding that it has not been found with the current situation.
Are the labs all online, or are they actually hands-on labs, like working with microscopes, whatever middle school people use?
Yes.
Yes, what?
They are hands-on. The labs that teachers have identified are hands-on. Microscopes can be used. There's multiple labs that are hands-on, in addition to what teachers have identified. As existing
There was
labs.
there was also some concern about the workbook. So there was some, well, Mark brought up last time we talked about the workbook a bit. But on top of the question of, well, are these going to last? It has come to my attention that some folks are concerned about whether workbooks are going to be available at all. There is some understanding among some of the people that are attending these meetings that workbooks are going to be few and far between, and that was a concern, that people would not be able to bring them home. They wouldn't be able to have that added kind of tactile thing that they can bring home to their family and work on what they've been working on in class somewhere other than a screen. And the availability of those for the amount of students that wanted them was another thing that I heard from multiple places. So just wanted to share that. As long as we're sharing things that maybe you're not hearing that we are, that was another thing that came up a couple of times, was the workbook situation. They're a little nervous about the lack of workbooks.
John, can I just jump on and answer that? So,
Sure.
a couple things with the workbook. Like, I use the online version in class, and then I have a couple students who prefer to have the workbook in front of them. They don't like to work on the screen, so they have that option. I provide those workbooks for the students who want them. The thing that I do for kids when they have homework that they need to take home is everything on Amplify can be printed also. I don't let them take the workbook home because I found that very rarely does it come back the next day. So I usually will just print out the sheet that they need for homework and have them take that home, and then they can also show their parents on the computer what they're working on as well. So there's multiple ways of doing it. I found that I just figure out what works for the kids. Some kids like to type, some kids would rather write. I'm pretty flexible, but I mean, if they want the workbook, I let them use it in class, and then I just print out the papers that they need to take home.
Yep. The students
And
access
just to add
this
on-
at home?
Yes.
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 Hey, John, quick question. The pace of the actual course, if it seems like it's going fast, do you have the option to take a breath, step back, have an acknowledgement check-in, and then kind of saying, hey, we might be going too fast on this material, or there's presentation, and then kind of go back and saying, hey, let's add another day or another, might be 2 days. Is there that flexibility in that schedule?
Yes, there's flexibility now, Frank, and that's a great question. That's where the art of teaching comes in. The teacher, no matter what course, content area, grade level, teachers are constantly modifying their instructional practice. If students are not grasping certain concepts, they're going to slow down and review, or if there are concepts or requirements that students are really getting, they're going to move forward. But that's where the art of teaching comes in. And again, I want to go back that Amplify is a resource. It's the teacher's expertise and professionalism that they're going to use, whether or not students need acceleration. Do we need to slow down? Are we hitting it just right? Is there something else that we might have to look at and bring in? That's the art of teaching.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just say, to interject about that question about the workbook? So I teach at West. I did not pilot the program, but I have been a member of this most recent task force. I did not get the understanding that we were not going to get workbooks or anything like that. And I've been on the task force. Also, I would vouch that we were definitely told that it was going to be voted on tonight for the meeting as well. So just to throw it out there, that I did not pilot it. So I'm one of the people that did not pilot the program, but I have been a member of this most recent task force, talking about the labs and such that are involved.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So Brian is correct. He was not a pilot teacher. The workbooks are online. We can purchase them. They're $18 per student. I would not recommend that. $18 times 1,500 students is expensive. But if that's something that the board feels is necessary, we certainly can purchase them. I would recommend against it for the reasons what Jessica had
John,
mentioned.
I don't
to
feel it's
interrupt.
necessary.
No,
I'm just,
John,
no.
I don't think anyone's arguing for the purchase
No.
of that. I
No.
think Jessica's example was exactly what the board needed to hear, that our teachers use their professional judgment to select when students do the resource or when they want to interact with the digital one. It's perfect.
Yeah, no.
But it's good that everybody knows it's available and we'll purchase it when needed for specific students who the teacher decides it's important for. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's a point I was trying to make.
I was certainly not suggesting that we should order one for every single kid.
Yeah.
I just wanted to
But they will
clarify
be available.
that if any one kid says, I really need a workbook to be successful in this, that we would be able to make that happen.
Right.
Per the teacher's decision making.
John, the 20-year-old text, if a kid needs a copy of that, they just tear that page out, right?
Yes. I would advise that,
Sorry.
but they can certainly,
Sorry, everybody.
they can do it, and I don't want to know about it, I guess.
Yeah.
All the answers are getting nice.
You're right.
You just make copies.
That's against copyright.
I know.
But
All right, any more?
I don't want to know about.
I'm sorry. Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, one quick one. As far as the textbook issue, what are we looking at supplying for a number of textbooks? 25% of the 1,500?
Mark.
I'm just asking a question because it's cost. You know, are we going to buy 400? Are we going to buy 100? Or are we going to buy 10?
Before we had a discussion about the idea of having maybe about 10 per classroom to have. That was usually like that was just like the first brainstorm idea that we've all kind of knocked around as the idea. Like, for example, I want no more than 10 in my room. That's a lot of stuff to have to store in those cabinets. So I think that many teachers would be on board with that same amount.
So you're looking at about percent of what you need in a class. Figuring there's 30 kids in a class.
No, actually I have about 178 students total, and it would be 10 for all of those students. But I run, usually I use them for my special education students, if any. And so usually that's the ones who need it is about 10 of my students.
Okay, any other questions? So kind of revamping from the back, do we have a motion for the vote? Because it was a motion for discussion.
So we had a motion from Cheryl for discussion. Sorry, Leah, correct. You're paying attention.
She moved to approve.
For discussion.
She clarified that the reason she was moving to approve is so that we could begin discussion.
Got it. Which Cheryl has done.
So the motion on the floor is the approval of the Amplify Science program.
Second from Darren, which I know I wrote down correctly. Jill's listening. So on the floor for a vote.
Okay, roll call. Jane?
No.
Cheryl?
No.
Darren?
Yes.
Amy?
No.
Mark?
Yes. Yes.
Leah?
No.
I'm a no also.
Okay, so John, pretty clear. We have a year of work. If you can decide whether or not to purchase those 3 additional people, the license to pilot for another year with this team, and we'll meet later in the week to regroup. So thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, everyone. All right, next on the agenda is the 2021 preliminary budget approval.
I don't think you're on, Andy.
This was brought last week as a review of our third look at the preliminary budget. Again, our total surplus as of last week was $211,043. This included the new hire for the curriculum integration or technology integration specialist. It includes a 4% healthcare increase, which we were able to verify that number, both Troy and I today with our consultants. Assuming we don't have any COVID issues, 4% looks like it will be good for our calendar year of 2020. And Everything else was just modifications, staffing, or benefit changes for those particular individuals. Everything else is held status quo from our review in April. Tonight, we're looking for an approval of the preliminary budget so that we can cut POs for things that have to get purchased at the beginning of the year. Things like in campus, student software, Skyward, our financial software, and some of the CIP items that were approved. We'd like to get those POs out and get those projects started so they can get in line for the summer.
Cerniglia moves to approve the 2021 preliminary budget as presented.
Rakoff seconds.
Any discussion? I got a question about Fund 50. Since we received that stimulus federal money, we still have a positive surplus, correct? Very small.
So our fund balance in Fund 50, which is food service, somewhere around $200,000 at last fiscal year end. We will probably be very close to putting that to zero by the time this year is over. Again, our biggest source of revenue is federal funds related to free and reduced students eating. And we are getting funds for our food service that's being provided since March 16th. But again, we're talking 600 meals a day versus probably 2,000 to 3,000 meals a day that were being generated in food service. So obviously our food cost is lower, but the revenue on a free or reduced meal is quite a bit higher than the cost of a meal when we talk about the actual labor and the actual food that's put into it. And so when we scale down 2,000 to 3,000 meals down to about 600, that ratio gets a little bit smaller of the profit margin. So in best case scenario, we break even on this particular year in food service and we end up somewhere around zero. Worst case is probably somewhere around $100,000 to $200,000 in the red, of which we will have to transfer out of Fund 10 this year. That again is a DPI requirement to make Fund 50 whole at the end of the year if it happens to be in the negative.
So Tahoe's contract, we should be saving money on that side, and that goes to Fund 50, correct?
Yep, we're saving quite a bit of money. They've furloughed all but 2 employees on our behalf. Our director of food service and her underlings, so her second charge, have remained on the payroll for a couple of reasons. One, we still have a lot of planning to do, so someone has to plan the meals and make sure everything is going according to the requirements of federal food service. The second piece is we run 2 food service groups. So the food service employees making and packaging meals are Oak Creek Franklin employees. They're not Tahoe employees. So we have kind of a week 1 and a week 2 group. So in case we were to have an issue or somebody were to be infected, we have an entirely new set of people that could come in and keep lunch moving while we have to quarantine that other group. But in order to do that, we have to have 2 people lead that. So we've kept on our director and we've kept on the second in charge in order to do that.
And then the contract with Right Way and the contract with our cleaning services, which we have 2 of them.
Correct.
Would that go to Fund 10?
So cleaning is all Fund 10. Cleaning is required regardless if a student is a regular education or a special education student. It's simply a facility. So that's all Fund 10. Currently, we are not paying on our cleaning service. We have everything disinfected. As soon as everything kind of came to light, we had cleaning crews go through every building, disinfect. At this point in time, because there's such a limited amount of people in the buildings at any given time, our custodial staff can keep up with that. So we're currently not paying on that. Transportation is Fund 10 and Fund 27. And we have directed by DPI to split the payment as you approved at the end of April. It has to be split based on the split we have, which is about 91 to 9 to 8% regular education to special education. So we have to have $497,000 and split that in that same fashion as well. So that hits both, essentially general education.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
On the Tahoe, when you said we were saving, or potentially could be saving a lot of money there, wouldn't any savings have to go like into that contingency fund that they have, that for like to pay for equipment and things like down the road?
Anything related to fund service has to, or food service has to stay in food service.
Okay.
So the dollars that we're saving from them furloughing their general employees, and that's stuck in the food service bucket, the food service window, can't be used for anything else. Now, when we have funds left in food service, we typically use those to repair machines or to replace machines. Many of our cooking appliances are as old as the buildings they're in or have been, changed out once. So they're still 20, 25 years old, and we try to get the max life out of them we can. But when we have extra funds, we look to replace things that are broken or so far down the road of repair that it's not worth repairing at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. All right. And then informational items, April's budget report.
So April's budget report, we'll start with the revenues up top. Everything is, for the most part, right in line with where we were. A couple things I'll just reference here. This other logo, if you look across at 200, you'll see it's quite high for this year. The City of Oak Creek's mobile home tax fees had been behind for a couple of years, so we received a pretty large bump in that to cover 3 years worth of payment. Interest is going to be one if we look just above that. We had estimated 369,000, but that was based on rates as they were accelerating in July, and we anticipated through the year, and we know that those have crashed given the pandemic. So that will certainly fall underneath its projection. Everything else seems pretty close to online. Just in general, I've already brought up the miscellaneous, which is 900. A couple of months ago, that is related to our E-rate reimbursement. So Chris Bennon's been able to do some extra things in technology that have federal funding attached to it, and a couple of other miscellaneous items we've been able to do. Fund 27 revenue is right in line with where we would expect it to be at this particular time of year. Flow through our claim, you'll see it's a little bit lower. I have my cursor here a little bit lower than years past. That's simply a timing of a claim. So we put in a claim on May 8th. Last year's would have been somewhere near the end of April. So that's simply timing. And we time those based on payrolls as well to try to maximize when a reimbursement is going to come in. Expenses, again, we are right in line with where we were last year for the most part. I do want to point out just a couple of things. Frank had already mentioned this one. This is transportation where my cursor is going across right here. So transportation, the payment that you approved on April 27th will be paid in May. We've received the invoice, we've cut the check and sent it out, but we didn't have enough time to turn it around in April with RightWay. If we go down one line, two lines, see supplies, 400 here, but I want to look at last year in particular. You'll see it says 3,643,000, but at the end of the year, we really only spent $2.5 million in that. I just want to remind our constituents and the board, we took out our Nexus or our referendum borrowing in June of last year. So we were covering a lot of expenses between January and June on cash we had on hand so that we would minimize the amount of interest taken out on those borrowings, which ultimately saves taxpayers dollars. And so in order to do that, we had to find a place to track it. And so we have a code in the system that allows us to track it specifically so we knew come June what we would transfer back. So you'll see it looks quite a bit larger than year end, but simply how we were tracking our Nexus payments to help stave off some interest cost in the long run. So those are a couple of things I wanted to mention there. And then I have our fund balance sheet as we're tracking it along here. Cheryl had asked last time about like fluctuation, and a lot of it is just timing of when payroll happens, when receipts come in, particularly from the state, and property tax make up the big bumps in revenue. But it really just is ebbs and flows based on invoices and pay periods.
Okay.
Any other questions? Are you going to come, I know we're talking about in the future, not just only this year, next year, the year after, we're in a surplus, but I just think it'd be good to kind of talk about the health of what you're, how we're looking for, again, in the future, budget-wise? Okay.
So we can certainly bring that forward this summer when Dan and I have a little bit more direction from the state. At this point in time, they've really, again, all of the direction has come from either the superintendent's group or the business managers group of kind of plotting a few different scenarios. Dan and I have taken a little bit more of a conservative approach. In the fact I mentioned last week, every $50 in reduction that would come, whether it's categorical aid or revenue limit from the state, would be about $309,000 for us. So rather than running the full gamut, having scenario A, B, and C ready to go, we're kind of waiting at direction of what that will look like, but knowing we're going to have potentially some level of dollars we're going to have to make up. At this point in time, $211,000 would be covered. So let's just say it was $50. So we'd have to come up with about $100,000. Given the size of our budget of roughly $80 million, we'd be able to figure that out relatively easy. And I've also mentioned we'll most likely be able to prepay our non-referendum debt of about $350,000. So truthfully, in my mind, I look at it as we're probably about $560,000 to the good. So even if we lost $100, we'd be down about $618,000, roughly $58,000 off of where we are now. So again, in $80 million, we'd be able to figure that out. If we start getting into the $100 mark, we're going to have to take a little bit larger look at that might like, because again, now we're talking $900 to $1.2 million of potential costs we'd have to figure out. But I feel pretty good about where we are for next year, just given the 211 and the 350,000. I'm quite confident we'll be able to transfer in. And we'll keep you abreast of anything we know about in future years as the biennium is going to come up, and that talk's probably going to start sooner rather than later this year. At least it pushback on both sides of the aisle.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Question? Okay, thanks, Andrew. Reviewing upcoming school board meeting tentative agendas.
Okay, next time we see each other, it's June. The Start College Now and early college credit program enrollments come around for discussion, as does the technical college program enrollments and Mr. Holler with the Wisconsin Interscholastic Athletic Association annual membership. Later on in June, those items come back again, but we also will see some policy updates for sign off, and the student academic standards come back, semi-annual review of Health and Wellness Center, which we're not sure what that's going to look like. You'll hear from us, a budget update from Andy, and we'll go into closed session for my evaluation. So that's coming around.
Would it be possible at all, Dan, on the June 8th agenda to get an update on the AP exams? By that point, students that had problems will have been able to retake. I'm just curious in total numbers within our district of how many took it, how many had problems, and I think they're retaking them the first week of June. Is everyone able to do it successfully? I don't know whether or not we get any information as a district other than what students tell teachers, but I would just be curious to know total numbers.
So Jane, since we've talked, like I'm actually kind of a little bit deeper into this, and you'll get something one way or another on that subject before we're all done.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Fair enough.
Anything else? All right. Now we're going into public meeting input. I didn't know if there's anybody in.
Sorry.
I'd like to chime in on one more thing about the summer. Could we possibly at June 8th get a longer plan out of some of the general, like we've talked there's like a lot of things that we've said we're going to do in the summer. I've lost track of what all of them are. Like we've talked about different work studies, and we talked about the possibility of having a like legislative update put into the calendar. And it's not that I expected that I would see them on June 8th or June 22nd specifically, but I don't want to keep thinking they're coming and then we never see them.
What do you mean when you say legislative update?
We talked about the SWASA. I know you wrote it down because you said we were going to work together to create some kind of like update. and
We'll
talk about
periodically
that.
bring something back to the
Like,
board.
literally, like, what are we, update on legislative
No.
issues,
I got you.
like a SWASA kind of recap. For
And the other note I had for a board study was something about curriculum, which seems exceptionally relevant given what's occurred tonight. So like understanding the process, the time, the resources, what delays do. So I've got that on here, but that's an entirely separate work study, catered all to itself. That's the one I had flagged for likely our July meeting, not a June meeting.
And yeah, and what I'm talking about is certainly not a work study. This is more of a
list of what's coming.
An agenda item on summit meeting that's going to take 15 minutes to talk about things that are, relevant to
A to-do list.
questions and in public education.
Just like a to-do list.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay.
And I feel like there were other things, but maybe not.
All right. Public input. This is time for that. I didn't know if there's anybody in the waiting room.
There is no one in the waiting room right now, so we're good.
Okay. All right.
And can I, in the future, can I ask why we are not having like public input before we do a vote on something? Like in the past, we've always had public input before we vote on an issue. So if somebody had a concern, they could speak their onions before we vote on it.
Cheryl, if you'd like me to move the placement of public comment, I'm happy to do that. Where would you like it?
Before a vote, because that's
Sure.
that's what we've done in the past.
Fine. I know that historically, and Jill and I have looked at this many times, in the last 6 years, like it's been placed in a variety of different places over the years.
Right.
If you'd prefer, if when we have a potentially controversial issue like this evening, I adjust it, that's very easy for me to do.
Okay.
Done.
I would thought that there was kind of a pattern for business meetings and a pattern for committee meetings.
There had been, but Dr. Culver adjusted it for controversial items.
Oh, okay.
Historically, under Dr. Burmeister, they always appeared at the end. Dr. Culver, based on what Cheryl has just said, often adjusted them for controversy, probably from a similar comment.
Yep.
And I can do that if that's the wish of the board.
Yep,
Yeah, I'd
fine.
agree.
Good.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Motion to adjourn.
Eichhoff motions that we adjourn the meeting.
Malat second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.